guys, here with you Anna Tutova, co-founder of Telegram, and our guest Justin Bones, who is co-founder of Cyber Capital, one of the oldest European hedge funds, and as well he has been a crypto researcher since 2014. Great to have you here, Justin.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So can you tell us about your journey in crypto? Which year did you discover it? Did you discover it in 2014, or did you know out about Bitcoin earlier? And how did you get involved into it?
Yeah, right. So actually, the first time I heard about cryptocurrency was 2012, around that time, and a friend of mine told me about it, thinking I would have an interest in it, since I like to tell him about the evils of central banking. But unfortunately, at that time, I because I didn't understand and it wasn't really explained to me well how proof of work worked, I really thought it was a scam, if I'm being completely honest. And I think that's a pretty healthy reaction for most people. And it wasn't really until 2013 that I really started digging deeper myself and being exposed to certain podcasts at the time that were talking about it, that really opened my eyes to the possibility of it. And then not long after that, 6 months or so, actually, by 2014, I decided to quit my day job, so to speak, and just become a full-time cryptocurrency person. Whatever that meant at the time, that's before I founded Cyber Capital in 2000, starting in 2015.
So what was your day job before getting into crypto?
So I did a few different things, actually. I worked as an audio engineer for a while, being very interested in music. And I also studied political philosophy and history as well. And it's really that background in the humanities that really gave me an insight into cryptocurrency, I feel, as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. So did computer engineering or philosophy help you in making your research now evaluating cryptocurrencies?
Audio engineering, not so much, actually. I think that's more of an artistic outlet for me. But I think philosophy, definitely, because it allows me to really apply a lot of critical thinking and allows me to think independently, so to speak.
Yeah, that's great. And as well, how did you decide to start your own hedge fund, Cyber Capital, and why did you decide to invest full time? And I read some of your tweets that you don't have any personal investments into crypto, just outside of your fund. Why is it so?
Well, I think it keeps things easier that way. There's no conflicts of interest, and it allows me just to focus on the investment fund that I manage. So I manage a portfolio of different cryptocurrencies, and I'm fully invested in my own product. So I think that helps also create trust, and especially when markets are down as well. I'm in the same boat as my investors. I also think that's important too.
And can you share any investment strategy for your funds? Because from your website, it's as I understand, you invest only on publicly traded tokens, no pre-sales, etc. So how do you select which tokens to invest? And for how long do you usually hold these or those tokens?
Right. So I take a more unique approach to investment. So it's really taking a value investing approach. So really trying to understand the fundamentals and what really makes up a cryptocurrency, and trying to answer some of the bigger questions, like monolithic scaling versus modular scaling, or do we have on-chain governance or off-chain governance, or proof of work versus proof of work? So proof of stake, sorry. And then building a perspective based on that over the long term. So really trying to understand, where is cryptocurrency going, and like, what is the best possible long-term investment in order to capture a part of that growth, a part of that potential. So in that sense, I'm very much a a fundamental investor. I do fundamental analysis. So that's where I really try to dig in. And this is different to say someone who's a trader who might do technical analysis and someone who's looking at charts. So instead of looking at charts all day, I'm reading white papers instead. I think that's maybe a good frame of understanding and really trying to identify where the real value is as well.
So what value do you see now? What market trends?
I know. I think cryptocurrency goes through a boom and bust cycle, and I try to transcend that a little bit because I also think in terms of at least 5 years plus in the future, and in that regard, I think it's I spend a lot more time thinking about the bigger trends and where things are going. So for me, I think some of the more important questions actually relate to how do we scale a blockchain, or how do we do governance? And I think these are some of the bigger questions that I think we should be focused on, as opposed to maybe the boom and bust cycle that the price and that these markets inevitably go through. I think what I'm far more interested in is actually what is the real utility, what is the real value that these systems are able to generate over the long term. And I think that's more my focus.
And talking about scalability of blockchain, you've been quite critical about Bitcoin specifically, on both that it's already outdated, as well on the security side and scaling too. And as well, you've been quite critical on other layer one solutions, like for example, Solana and Polygon. So can you explain your point of view, why you're so critical? You criticized Polygon for the lack of decentralization. So can you expand more on that for our audience?
Sure. No, I'd love to. So Solana, Polygon, and Bitcoin. There's a few things to unpack there. So in the case of Polygon, I think this is one of the more straightforward ones to explain. There's a multi-signature admin key, which basically is able to steal over $1 billion worth of user funds. And there's been a distinct lack of disclosure around the operational security of that multi-signature. So I think that should be a major concern. And this is also true for a lot of layer twos today, that they're still very centralized actually, because they have these admin keys in place or centralized sequences. And there's a lot of these problems that we're still facing. And I have been vocal in pointing that out. And over the years, and including Chris Black has been very vocal about this as well. That they really need to come out and burn the admin key, or at the very least come up with some sort of disclosure or plan about how they can phase that out. But so far they haven't been very responsive to our concerns, and I think that's a real problem. Yeah. Bitcoin, if I explain my critique of Bitcoin, I think its capacity is very low. So at 7 to 13 transactions per second, it will take close to 70 years for everyone in the world to do a single transaction, or to be onboarded on the Lightning Network, if you will. And I just very much consider that to be untenable. And also because, much of my investment thesis, at least, is also based on, identifying utility. And I feel like what Bitcoin has done by very much rejecting its roots and really changing its underlying design, its purpose, its underlying economic model, through the course of the block size debates, where it really steered away from being a peer-to-peer electronic cash, which is literally the title of the Bitcoin white paper, that I think it really created some huge problems and huge consequences. Not only does it lack utility, it also lacks a long-term security budget, because it was meant to have a lot of transactions, each paying a small fee, and it's no longer possible for that to be the case. So therefore, there's a real dilemma in the future in terms of, how is Bitcoin going to pay for its security? So I predict within at least 7 to 11 years, this is going to become a real problem in terms of the security threshold being crossed, where it actually becomes profitable to attack. At which point, I think, you're really faced with two choices. Either Bitcoin is insecure and you have your 21 million euro limit, or you need to add inflation and go past the 21 million limit. And that's really the only solution that will be left by that time. And I don't think it will be able to change soon enough, let's say, in order for that to become a real crisis. So that's something I've been warning people about. I was also involved in the block size debates myself, actually advocating for bigger blocks. So I feel very, at least consistent today in terms of my critique of Bitcoin and where that's heading. Solana, funnily enough, is actually at least fundamentally in terms of its design, is somewhat the opposite problem. Its blocks are too big. So I've always seen myself more as a moderate, if you will. You can't have capacity that's too high, because then that can affect the decentralization of the system, but you also don't have it too low. I also think that can negatively impact the decentralization of the system, because you're disincentivizing increased participation and more use cases, which actually, in the grand scheme of things, can actually increase the distribution of power. So, yeah, and besides from that, there's also some other issues with Solana that I've taken issue with, where I have uncovered some fraud at the birth of the project in terms of, them lying about the circulating supply, and also how TPS is actually inflated due to how Solana is actually designed. The majority of transactions that you see on Solana are actually quote unquote fake. So I think that's, there's a whole range of issues. I recently released another article actually about it. So you can check that out on my Medium page or my Twitter.
And talking about Bitcoin, generally it's considered that, especially Bitcoin maximalists, consider Bitcoin their only totally decentralized asset and the most secure asset, unlike any other tokens. So why do you disagree with that? And what other alternative solutions do you consider still to be decentralized, or there is no such solution at all and it's totally impossible?
um right, so I think some people, when they follow me, they might think that I'm actually a cryptocurrency critic, but I am actually a believer in this movement. And part of part of why I'm critical is because I want to see us clean up our act more and actually do things in a better way. So I actually do think that we can scale blockchains. And I want to loop back to the issue of BTC security and maybe the perceptions some maximalists might have. But I think that I'll actually talk about that now. The thing about BTC security is actually that I wouldn't even consider it the most secure, or definitely not the most decentralized cryptocurrency today. I mean, we have to really start to think about, well, how can we objectively measure decentralization? And like, what is decentralization? What is it meaningfully? And I think meaningfully, it's the distribution of power, and also, the division of power around decision making as well. And I think specifically, actually, BTC is very centralized around a single development team, Bitcoin Core. And the way Bitcoin Core is governed is through GitHub. And you literally have a lead maintainer who has the final say over all decisions made. So this lead maintainer, or this client implementation, can effectively act as a gatekeeper to all change, to all decisions. And I think that is like a major vulnerability in a blockchain, is when you have that sort of extreme centralization. And what's made it even worse in the case of Bitcoin is because of the culture that's been built up around it, and that it's it's considered even to be an attack on Bitcoin to have a competing client implementation. That's what a lot of the block size debates were about as well. It's really considered an attack. And that's led to a point now where, like, if you look at a pie chart, it's 98% Bitcoin Core right now. And the other client implementations are very much are going to follow Core, I think, for a large part. And I think that if you look at decentralization in a more holistic way, and you think about it in terms of client centralization, validation distribution, I wouldn't consider node counts particularly high. I actually think that block production is actually far more important compared to just counting the number of nodes. You actually have to count the number of distinct political entities that are involved in block production or validation. I think that's a much more important metric to kind of understand, what does decentralization really mean? And in that sense also, proof of work, it has inherent economies of scale that are involved. And I think because of that, proof of stake actually has the potential to be far more decentralized in that it can have a much wider distribution of power. And I think that's where, proof of stake is actually, I would argue, is actually more secure, more decentralized, and actually even more sound as a store of value, because you get a lot more bang for your buck, so to speak, in the case of proof of stake. You're able to design a system that has lower fees and that also has lower inflation, better scarcity characteristics, which can make it a better store of value. So, and in regards to, what do I believe in? I'm a big advocate for on-chain governance. I'm a big advocate for monolithic scaling, actually, through sharding. I think sharding, execution sharding specifically, is very important way that we can actually scale blockchains horizontally while preserving decentralization.
So in this case, which cryptocurrencies do you consider to be the most decentralized?
The most decentralized now, probably, it's hard to say, probably Ethereum, and that's in large part due to the virtue of its scale, just because of the size of it. It's not necessarily that its design is more decentralized than others, because it does lack on-chain governance, but it has a diverse client implementation, so it actually has multiple development teams, and Ethereum actually went through great costs to actually ensure that it had multiple development teams from the very beginning, even developing separate code bases, and this created the client diversity that I think is very important in any cryptocurrency. Otherwise, I really think, the idea that it's quote unquote truly decentralized is somewhat of a farce, because if it all still goes for a single set of developers, it's not really that decentralized in the end. And I think that's where cryptocurrencies still need to grow a lot, really, before we really achieve, a true decentralization, so to speak. And the same is true for on-chain governance as well. On-chain governance doesn't really function unless it's at a massive scale. So it's a bit of a chicken before the egg problem, really.
And how do you generally see the current crypto markets? For how long will we in bear market? Especially today, we see significant decline in Bitcoin price. So what do you see happening next?
Well, like I said, as an investor, I'm really focused on the long term. So I'm bullish. Say that the price will be up in 5 years from now. I think I can say that with a lot of confidence, and that's my focus, 3 to 5 years. Look, I think cryptocurrency goes through a boom and bust cycle. And I'm not really the right person to say when the bear market is going to end. I think it will likely follow a similar pattern to what it did before.
Many say that we should expect the next bull market after Bitcoin halving. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I don't think that is the case. I don't know, the Bitcoin halving is especially now, it's a very small effect. If you look at the total volume and you actually look at, or the reduction of inflation that's actually occurring, it's tiny compared to the grand total of market cap and the amount of supply that's out there. So in that sense, it's really a non-event. How I think we should be looking at the the halvening, is that when Bitcoiners see that the inflation is halving, that also means their security budget is halvening. So every 4 years, if the price does not double, the security of Bitcoin halves And if you understand exponential functions, you understand it can't just keep halving forever. It can't just keep halving for 100 years. Within 30 years, you exceed global GDP. You can't then halve for another 70 years after that, right? This is part of why Bitcoin has this massive dilemma that it's facing in its security model. And this is what's going to lead as well to its downfall, in my view. It's this major glaring flaw in its design, which is ironic considering, as you mentioned earlier, that Bitcoiners think that it's the most decentralized and the most secure. And in reality, it's one of the few cryptocurrencies that can't tell you where its security budget's going to come from in 7 to 11 years.
And so you talk always that now Bitcoin is purely speculative, doesn't have any utility, but still do you have it in your portfolio, or did you get rid of it?
So Cyber Capital, the fund I manage, we haven't held any BTC in our portfolio since 2017, actually. So, and I came into this space as a Bitcoiner, right? Really identifying with that movement and really finding a community there and having a more libertarian bent as well. So it was hard to go against all of that because it's actually something that I really loved. But I think because I love Bitcoin so much, I need to go against it because I love what Bitcoin stands for. And BTC no longer stands for what Bitcoin once stood for. And I think that's something that's actually worth fighting for because I actually care about the vision of the Bitcoin white paper of peer-to-peer electronic cash. And I actually want to have this decentralized, censorship resistant, highly secure, self-sovereign money in the world. And I actually, in that sense, I still see myself as a Bitcoiner in so many ways. And I think, if you truly believe in Bitcoin, you truly believe what it originally stood for, then you should reject BTC. Then you should, join the fight against it and, support cryptocurrencies that actually do, stand behind Satoshi's vision and that actually do want to create a brighter future, right? I think so much of the BTC narrative, I think, is either fueled by greed or ignorance. Unfortunately, there are Bitcoiners out there that I respect, and I love those guys for biting the bullet on hard issues. But ultimately, I think they're wrong in the way they're seeing this, and I think that the market is this amazing mechanism, and cryptocurrency and Bitcoin was really released as this kind of free market monster on the world. And I think part of Bitcoin is how it evolves. And I'm afraid that the market will route around Bitcoin and will do that through alternative cryptocurrencies. And I think in that sense, our future is very bright and the technology is still evolving and it's still being developed. So it's a very exciting time, to be alive and to have a say in writing these constitutions. That will continue to serve our civilization, I think, for a very long time. But I'm afraid it won't be Bitcoin. It's too many wrong turns. I'm not saying that it's just going to cease to exist because one thing that blockchains are very good at is just surviving and just refusing to die. You can find some like tiny 2012 abandoned altcoin and you still find it like number 5,000 market cap, but it actually is still, blocks are still being produced, right? Like these things don't die, but I see how Bitcoin will lose its position, its top position in market capitalization, and also really lose a lot of its significance that it holds today. And I think that's something we need to do. Even though I am sad that it's a bit tragic and it's a bit of a lost opportunity, and it does damage, I think, as well, to perception. But I think what does more damage is pretending as if everything is fine while the house is on fire. I think in the longer run, I think that's going to be worse for this movement. We're going to lose even more respectability, like of supporting an emperor that wears no clothes. I think we can do a lot better than that, and we deserve a lot better than that.